Today, if your local bank goes under, the federal government guarantees you won't lose your deposits. When you reach retirement age, Social Security provides a baseline income. We accept these safety nets as standard, permanent features of American life. But in the fall of 1929, those protections did not exist. On October 29th, panic selling hit the American stock market with such violence that ticker tape machines, the only way to track prices, couldn't keep up. Investors watched tangles of paper spill onto the floor, completely blind to what their shares were actually worth, because the machines were hours behind the crash. By the time the trading bell rang that afternoon, billions of dollars in personal wealth had simply vanished into thin air. To understand the shock of that day, you have to look at the decade right before it. The 1920s were a period of dizzying wealth. American factories were churning out consumer goods at a massive scale, and a booming middle class was taking that new income and pouring it straight into the stock market. The guiding political philosophy of this boom was championed by President Herbert Hoover. He called it rugged individualism. This was the strict belief that any citizen could survive and prosper through absolute personal effort. More importantly, it meant that direct government intervention in the economy was viewed as a moral hazard, a handout that would destroy a person's character. This mindset guaranteed that when the system broke, the government would stay entirely out of the way. The problem was that the booming stock market wasn't isolated from everyday life. Thousands of banks across the country had taken their own customers' cash deposits and recklessly gambled them on Wall Street. When the market collapsed, the banks lost their customers' money. Word spread and localized panic set in. People rushed to bank branches, packing into dense crowds, desperate to withdraw their savings before the vaults ran dry. Most of them were too late. Between 1929 and 1933, 9,000 individual banks failed. Every single person with an account in those institutions lost their life savings, their retirement funds, and their business capital overnight. With the banks gone, credit froze completely. This financial sickness rapidly expanded out of the cities and into the commercial sector. Factories couldn't borrow money to operate. Construction sites went quiet. Retail stores shuttered their doors. As those businesses closed, their employees were let go. In 1929, American unemployment sat at a manageable 2%. Within 3 years, 25% of the country, 1 in 4 workers, had no job and zero income. With the government refusing to intervene, hundreds of thousands of Americans lost their homes. Out of desperation, they scavenged wood, cardboard, and tin to build massive shantytowns right in the shadows of major cities. In bitter tribute to the president who abandoned them, they called these crude shacks Hoovervilles. Extreme poverty became the great leveler of American society. Men who had been highly successful businessmen just 12 months prior found themselves standing in the dirt alongside day laborers, waiting in massive, winding lines for hours just to receive a bowl of soup and a piece of bread. Then the agricultural sector failed. Decades of aggressive overfarming on the Great Plains had stripped away the natural grasses. When a severe, multi-year drought arrived, the loose topsoil simply blew away, creating apocalyptic dust storms that swallowed entire towns and turned the daytime sky black. This environmental disaster created a domestic refugee crisis. 3.5 million people packed whatever they had left into broken-down cars and trucks and fled the Dust Bowl, traveling to squalid migrant camps in California in a desperate search for crop-picking work. By 1932, the financial system was shattered, the agricultural heartland was buried in dust, and a quarter of the workforce was starving. The scale of the suffering broke the American psyche, creating a widespread desperation that required the government to completely rewrite its contract with the public. In the winter of 1932, voters demanded a lifeline. They elected Franklin Delano Roosevelt in a massive landslide, a clear mandate for immediate federal action. Roosevelt didn't wait. On his very first day in office, he declared a national bank holiday. He forced every bank in the country to close for 4 days, pushing through emergency legislation to implement strict federal oversight. When the banks reopened, the panic was over. That was just the beginning. Roosevelt launched a sweeping package of legislation called the New Deal, designed to weld structural safeguards directly into the American economy. He created the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC, to guarantee that citizens would never again lose their savings to a bank failure. He established the Securities and Exchange Commission to aggressively regulate the stock market and curb reckless speculation. He also intervened directly in the labor market. Through agencies like the Civilian Conservation Corps and the Works Progress Administration, the federal government bypassed the frozen private sector and directly hired millions of Americans to build roads, bridges, and public infrastructure. But the most significant shift came with the creation of Social Security. By providing guaranteed income for the elderly and disabled, the federal government officially accepted a direct, inescapable obligation to protect the basic economic survival of its citizens. The era of total self-reliance was dead. The New Deal stopped the bleeding, but it did not fully cure the economy. Unemployment remained stubbornly high throughout the 1930s. It took the massive, rapid industrial expansion required to fight World War II to finally put the entire American workforce back onto assembly lines. Even as the economy recovered, the people who lived through the darkest years of the 1930s carried the trauma with them. They spent the rest of their lives hiding emergency cash in their homes, distrusting banks, and planting backyard vegetable gardens because they knew exactly what starvation felt like. These hardened survivors went on to rebuild the nation's wealth, fight the largest conflict in human history, and earn the title of the greatest generation. But the institutional scaffolding they built remains active today. When we argue over minimum wage, debate the scope of healthcare, or negotiate unemployment insurance, we are directly referencing the survival mechanisms designed during the Depression. America learned the hard way that a wealthy society cannot survive if it allows its people to fall into absolute ruin. The strict illusion of rugged individualism collapsed, and in its place, we built a safety net that we are still standing on today.